Welcome to this week's episode of Talking Therapy. Talking Therapy is the companion podcast to my YouTube series In Therapy. We follow brave participants on their real-life therapeutic journeys with me. As part of my mission to break the stigma around mental health, chronic illness, also the reality we all go through challenging chapters in our lives. And the more guidance and wisdom and support we have through those chapters, the more easily we can navigate through them. The point in recording this episode, we've released over 50 episodes now of In Therapy. We're enormously proud of that library of kind of wisdom and journeys that people have been on. I hope wisdom, which sounds a little arrogant, say that yourself, but certainly the feedback is that people find these episodes incredibly helpful. So if you haven't already, do go and check out some of the backstories and some of the journeys that we've been on. We're currently on a 2-week break on In Therapy. We've been going at the episodes hard, and with the Fatigue Super Conference and so on, we're just having a little bit of a chance to catch up. Also, to let you know, in this week's episodes, we're going to be exploring some themes that have come out of some of the recent episodes of In Therapy. I'm going to be talking about writing letters as a therapeutic tool. This is something that Katie recently did. I'm going to talk about saying sorry. Saying sorry, I think, sometimes in life can be hugely important, but it can also sometimes be a way for us to diminish our own self-worth. It's a very British thing sometimes to put ourselves down in the presence of other people. So how do you navigate that balance? Also, I'm going to answer some of your questions. We have a question around being in a state of dissociation and a question around forgiveness. As a reminder, please do email questions to hello@alexhoward.com, or even better, post your question below any of the videos on my YouTube channel, particularly the episodes of In Therapy. We don't necessarily always respond on the comments, but we do read all of the comments. They really become the raw ingredients for these episodes. I find them incredibly helpful to have a sense of how these ideas in the episodes are landing with you, the community, the people that ultimately we make them for. Also, just a reminder, if you don't already follow me on Instagram, on Facebook, obviously on YouTube, we put out different content on those different platforms, and we're working really hard, particularly on Instagram, to break down some of the ideas and themes that are here, both in Therapy and in Talking Therapy. So if you'd like to go deeper into those ideas, have some daily support and inspiration, Instagram is a great place to do that. So on this week's episode, firstly, we're going to explore the idea of writing letters as a therapeutic tool. This is something that I recently asked Katie to do. Katie's been having for many years, challenging relationships with her family, particularly her parents. By the way, this is something I think a lot of people resonate with. And it can sometimes be quite difficult to work these issues with people when all of the sort of a history and the sort of reactivity we can have with them comes up. And I find writing a letter can be a really helpful way to sort of connect more deeply with ourselves and focus our thoughts. Here's a couple of clips from Katie's episodes. Firstly, where we first talk about writing the letter, and then secondly, where she talks about her experience having gone through the process of doing that.
Do you think I should just write this letter then and just keep it?
Yeah, if you feel you need to write it now, write it now. We will likely come to some of these sort of therapeutic exercises in time as well. If it feels like you sort of can't move on until you get it down, then yes, that's fine to write it now. But I would think very carefully before sending it at this point.
I don't want, I do feel more compassion. I don't feel the anger that I did. And so it's just so that it's almost like so they know, but I understand your point about not sending it. And maybe I
don't know enough about the dynamics to say don't send it. I'm just saying that what you're trying to get, I think, is twofold. One of which is to express and process what you're feeling. And the second is to try and, support things in the dynamics. And those two things aren't necessarily kind of deeply connected.
So I just explained in the letter that what I'd done and that I was proud of the work that I'd done. I liked the person that I'd discovered, and I was
say that again.
Her,
I want to hear that again. You say you liked the person you discovered.
I liked that I found. Yeah. And I know what I found is somebody who hates conflict, who doesn't really care whether I'm a success or not, as long as I'm happy and peaceful. And the peace is, that's what I found. Oh, and I ended the letter saying, that I'm happy with who I am. I'm walking into my future with a renewed confidence or whatever, self-assuredness, and I've accepted that the family issues may never resolve, and I've got acceptance around that. It's not what I want, but I've got acceptance around it, and and I have to accept that I might never have that family that idealized family that I've always longed for. And I said, and I want you all to know that I take full responsibility for my part in that dysfunction, and I'm truly sorry for the pain I've caused, and or for any pain I've caused any of you. And I hope we can move forward in some way or another. And I didn't prescribe how I thought that should look, what I thought that should look like, or how I thought we should do that. And then I ended it. I wish you all love, peace, and good health.
Wow, Katie, good for you. So why is this process helpful? Well, firstly, as I mentioned, it's helpful because it really helps us formulate and connect to our feelings. When we're actually around people in person, it's so easy to get triggered and be reactive with, they just sometimes have to look at us in a certain way, and it triggers a whole set of feelings and emotions in response. Or, we just find before they even look at us or say something, all of the history and the emotions and sort of unprocessed stuff of that person, it's there in our body. When we sit to write a letter, and we really take the time and the space to reflect on, to think about, how do we actually feel? What is it that we actually want to communicate and say to that person? It tends to be so much easier and so much more effective, because we also have the time and the space to really make sense of and connect to how it is that we actually feel, as opposed to they say that, we feel this, they look at us that way, we have that response. And we all carry around so much unprocessed emotion, history, things that have happened, things that haven't happened, things that have been said, things that should have been said, that working to process and metabolize and digest some of that, it's one of the ways I talk about it. It's like a black sack of emotion that's heavy. It weighs us down in our lives. And when we're interacting with people, rarely are we actually able to be fully present and connected in the moment. We're not responding to the moment. What we're responding to is all of the stuff in that black sack, which is getting triggered. And it's like, sometimes what happens is we're holding onto the kind of lid of that sack so tightly. Then someone says something and a little bit of the emotion that's held in there slips out. And then suddenly the kind of top comes off and the whole thing explodes. That's where often people, the less that we are processing and healing our emotions, the more vulnerable in a sense we are to these massive emotional explosions of stuff that comes forwards. To really be able to be connected, to be present in the now and in the moment, we have to metabolize, we have to process, we have to digest all of that stuff that we find ourselves carrying around. Writing letters is a great way to do that, because it allows us to take the time to look inside the bag, the black sack a little bit. What's this? How do I feel about that? What is it that I wanted to say to that person about that thing that happened, and how I find myself feeling and responding now? In terms of the actual process of writing these letters, there's a few stages that I tend to recommend that you go through. Put another way, there are a few drafts of the letter that I recommend that you go through. The first draft, you just let it flow. You're not trying to sort of edit or censor what it is that you have to say. You're just splurging out kind of the raw, unedited feelings and emotions that you feel. That version is likely to be more aggressive. It's likely to be more reactive. It's likely to sort of be more blaming and more accusing of the other person. But it's important to let yourself have those feelings, because by doing that, something gets to move. And it's like you've shifted and you've moved some of that initial just kind of maybe rage, anger, frustration that's there. We then move to the second edit. The second edit is you're not sure if you're going to send the letter or not, but you're editing it as though you are, or as though at some point the other person's going to read it. So you're starting to think about, is what I'm saying in this moment here actually reasonable? What do I really need them to know? Am I really being honest about how it is that I actually feel? Is this the truth of my feeling, or is this the kind of layer of reactivity? What's underneath that layer of reactivity? You're really asking yourself, what does my heart need this person to see and to hear and to feel? Now, you might go through a few second drafts. So it might be a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth draft. It might be that, and I really recommend doing a draft, leaving it, coming back to it a few days or a week or two later. You're shaping it. Like if you're someone that's writing a book or writing a poem or doing a painting, you're coming back and you're rethinking, actually, that bit was really passive aggressive. I was saying sorry, but I wasn't really saying sorry. I was blaming the other person. Or in that moment, I was just not owning my responsibility. So you come through it a few times. You then have, at some point, a decision to make. Do you actually want to and need to send this letter to this person? Or was this really an exercise that was for you and for you? If you decide to send it, my recommendation is to sit with that decision for at least a few days, ideally a week or two, and make sure you still feel that way. It may be that initially you're sort of in the momentum and the sort of energy of the process, and then on reflection, you're like, actually, I don't need this person to read it, but I need you to go through the process of writing the letter. And at that point, if you are going to send it, you may well do another version. You might take some pieces out, you might add some pieces in. It can be very helpful to show that letter to a few very trusted sort of friends or family or therapists or whatever and say, I want to send this letter. How do you think it might be received? Do you think that's going to be helpful in that relationship? I feel very strongly therapeutically that sometimes it can be very helpful, of course, to express how it is that we feel to others. But sometimes we can be too quick, I think, to want for everyone to see and hear and to feel everything that we're feeling without taking the time to think about how is that truly going to land for that other person. And just because we've gone through an inner transformation, it doesn't necessarily mean the other party has done the same. And it's something that I talked to Katie quite a bit about in one of her episodes, the episode after she'd sent the letter, about what are actually realistic expectations from that other person. Here's a clip of Katie and I talking about that. One can only see a situation through the lens of their own dysfunction, right? So they're not suddenly going to transform and change. And a dangerous path to go on is to think, oh, we've had a step forward. Oh, that means it's going to get to this sort of fantasized place. You're then only going to be disappointed. So what I think is much...
It's really helpful for you to say that, because that is, I think I'm guilty of, idealizing and also wanting everybody to think.
Everyone see it the way that you
do what I do.
You want to be seen in the sense that they'll go, oh my God, you're totally right. That's exactly what's been going on. And
that's what I want.
I'm sorry, Katie, it's not what's going to happen. So what I would say, it's almost like being at the casino and banking the wins along the way. So rather than sort of going, right, I've got to win everything in the casino, it's going, I've just had a real win. I've expressed myself in a vulnerable, authentic way, and I've been met in a way which is ultimately loving and accepting and caring. Sure, there's some bits in there that you might analyze and go, oh, I wonder what's going on there. But fundamentally, that was a really kind and loving response. So take the win, right? Doesn't mean that you don't try and progress it further, but be careful not to build up an expectation that's unreasonable of anyone, including of them, and then leaves you feeling frustrated. What I would do is focus on the love that is there and feel that, appreciate that your parents love you. They might not know how to show it in the perfect way. They might have plenty of their own issues, But aside from all of that, they love you enough to write you a letter like that.
Ultimately, there is amazing potential for our relationships with those that we love to change and to evolve. But holding a realistic expectation for that is really important. And the more healing we do in ourselves, ultimately, the less needy and dependent that we are of necessarily how others will respond anyway. It's not to say that those responses aren't still important, but the more wounded we are, the more hurt we are, the more angry we are, the more dependent we then become on having the response that we want from the people in the world around us. So I now want to talk a little bit about the idea of saying sorry. Sorry is a very, very British thing. It's something, and of course other cultures do it as well, but it's a very British thing. It's like someone bumps into you in the street and you say sorry to them, right? That's something that is just a very common thing, that we make a mistake and we're immediately sorry for the mistake that we've made. And the point that I'm going to make here is not that saying sorry isn't important. I mean, in a minute, I'm going to make the point of why saying sorry can be so important. But we can also be very quick sometimes to diminish ourselves and always make ourselves wrong in the interactions that we have with people. I talked recently on the podcast about the idea of a continuum of responsibility. There are people that never take responsibility. It's always somebody else's fault. But there are others of us that always take responsibility, even when it's not our responsibility. Being psychologically and emotionally healthy in the world, part of that is having an appropriate kind of level, place of responsibility. If we're constantly making things our fault and we're constantly apologizing for our existence and apologizing to others, it tends to be because our inner critic is always on our case. So our inner critic keeps telling us it's your fault, you're wrong, you're bad, you messed up, you screwed up, you did this. And so in a sense, we're apologizing because we're trying to kind of defend ourselves and sort of get some space back from our inner critic. The more we defend against our inner critic, the more we own and we take up the space, which is ours to inhabit, the less of a need we then have to always be, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be here, I shouldn't exist, I don't deserve my place in the world. That said, of course, there are times it's really important to say sorry. And of course, if we're talking about the smaller things, like we actually do bump into someone in the street and we say, I'm sorry, that's one thing. But when it's the bigger things in our lives, just flippantly saying, oh, I'm sorry, saying sorry is about making sure that sorry really lands. It's making sure that the other person actually hears what it is that you're trying to say to them. This is a part of my life, particularly with the kids. I'm very aware that as a parent, guess what? You don't always get it right. But how you repair when you don't get it right is really important. Saying sorry with eye contact, saying sorry and saying why you're sorry, saying sorry and saying how you'd like it to be different in the future or what you feel you could learn from it. Being very careful not to do passive-aggressive sorries, like, I'm sorry, but it's, the essence of which is, I'm sorry, but it's really your fault. If you're saying sorry, you are taking responsibility for and you're owning your behavior, what it is that you've done or not done or said or whatever it may be. I'd also say really choosing your moments, because sometimes we say sorry in a way that the other person doesn't hear, or our nervous system is still too activated. Like, as much as we want to say it in a way which is clean, we're so wired and so stimulated in our own body that actually we need to just go and take some space to ground, right, to calm and settle our nervous system, to then be able to say sorry from a place which we genuinely are. Because sorry ultimately comes from the heart, right? We actually need to be connected to our heart and our body for our sorry to actually truly be a heartfelt apology. So this is a big area, and I wanted just to speak briefly to it because I felt that it was a theme that had come up in a few places in kind of indirectly in the series. We may well open it up more. I'd be curious in your response to this. Do you find saying sorry easy? Do you find it difficult? Do you resonate with what I'm saying of like just apologizing all of the time, even when it might not be your fault? When has someone apologized to you in a way that you really felt, like really landed? What was different about that? I'd be really curious to hear that as well. So I want now to come to just a couple of your questions. The first one was an anonymous question, which was, what is dissociation and what can I do about it? Is it an important part of healing from ME, chronic fatigue syndrome? So dissociation is effectively when we don't feel connected to our body and to the moment. Often we can feel quite spaced out. Often we feel anxious in that place. We can feel like we're not quite in reality, like the world just feels a bit unreal and a bit kind of strange. Dissociation there's lots of things that may be causing it on a physiological level. It could be caused by blood sugar issues, by hormone imbalances. It could be caused by other biological processes that are happening. It's often also caused by trauma. So when we have, big traumas, small traumas, what happens is to survive that moment, we literally disconnect from the moment. We go into our mind and our mind races. Sometimes it feels almost numb and frozen, but our whole system speeds up. This is effectively a maladaptive stress response if we get locked in this state. We speed up and we become kind of out of reality as a way to avoid the sort of pain and the difficulty of what's happening in reality. It can be an important part of recovery from ME chronic fatigue, not because dissociation in of itself is the issue. It's a sign or it's a symptom of often of a maladaptive stress response. Calming that, using tools to calm the mind, to calm the nervous system. What are the feelings and emotions we're trying to get away from? All of that can be a really important part of cultivating the healing state that we need for healing ultimately to be able to happen. Another question from Angelique on YouTube. I would love to hear you talk about a healthy approach to practice forgiveness. This could well be a theme for a podcast in of itself. I'm just going to give a couple of kind of short answers to this. Firstly, I always feel with forgiveness, a little bit like what I was saying with writing therapeutic letters, work on yourself first. What are the emotions and feelings that are coming up that are in the way? Because forgiveness ultimately is a natural state for us. If we're having to practice forgiveness, that means we're not feeling it. So there may be anger, rage, frustration, hurt, rejection. Working through those emotions is what then allows us to truly forgive in our heart. Not just forgiving in our mind, but to truly come to a place where in our hearts we feel forgiveness. Look out for your inner critic. Often one of the things that gets in the way of forgiving is the constant blaming ourselves, judging ourselves, criticizing ourselves, or doing the same of other people. More space we can get from that, the easier I think it definitely becomes. Separating the behavior from the intention of others. Sometimes people can behave in ways that are really hurtful and really unhelpful, but their heart, their intention is one of love. If we can see the intention or who they are beyond the behavior, it's often easier to forgive the behavior. Final point, and I realize as I say these points, these are quite big ideas that need more space, but just to speak to it briefly, be very careful of just forgiving people in your heart when they haven't necessarily changed. You can forgive, but I wouldn't always encourage to forget how someone's historically behaved towards us. If you've got a friend or a family member who tends to be quite cruel and quite unkind with their words, for example, yes, forgive the past, but remember you may need a certain amount of emotional distance or to have a certain amount of emotional armor and protection when you're around that person, because they're likely sometimes to speak in ways that are hurtful and are perhaps cutting. So that separation of forgiving, but also remembering your boundaries and what you need to take care of yourself, I think is really important. So I hope this week's podcast has been helpful. Remember, please do send in your questions. Email hello@alexhoward.com. Comment below any of the videos on YouTube, particularly the In Therapy episodes. As I mentioned at the start, we're having a 2-week break from In Therapy, but the weekly podcasts are going to continue. If you haven't recently checked out my YouTube channel, we've reorganized some of the content on there. We've got different playlists. We've got a playlist for each participant of In Therapy, playlist for the podcast, playlist for the guided meditations, also a playlist of the short sort of inspirational videos that we've been making as well. If you just want a 2, 3, 4 minute sort of emotional lift and bit of guidance, those shorts I think are really helpful as well. So do check those out. As I said at the start, do check out my Instagram particularly, posting daily content, breaking down the themes and the ideas, both from In Therapy and from here, the podcast, Talking Therapy. Hope this has been helpful. Be kind to yourself. Go gently.